They were sent in last, and usually didn't come back. On the black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, the US Marines had no choice but to deploy the most terrifying weapon in their arsenal: flamethrowers. They could clear bunkers and caves, but the men carrying them paid the ultimate price. Most didn't survive longer than 4 minutes. This isn't just the story of a weapon. It's the story of hell on Earth, and the men who stepped into it willingly. Recently declassified records and survivor accounts reveal what really happened when fire met stone on the bloodiest island of the Pacific War. Before we talk about fire, we need to talk about stone. Iwo Jima wasn't just any piece of land. It was a black, jagged scar in the Pacific Ocean. Barely 8 square miles of volcanic rock steaming with sulfur, wind-blasted and dead. There were no trees, no rivers, no shelter. But to the US military, this island was priceless. Located exactly halfway between the Mariana Islands and the Japanese mainland, it sat along the critical air path that B-29 Superfortress bombers flew during bombing runs on Japan. If America could take it, they would gain a desperately needed emergency landing site and a launch point for fighters to escort bombers. But if they failed, it would become a graveyard. The Japanese command saw this coming months in advance, and what they did to prepare defied all logic. Under orders from General Tadamaki Kurabayashi, they didn't simply dig trenches. They transformed the island into a death trap. They carved over 11 miles of tunnels through the island's core. Command bunkers, mortar nests, machine gun pillboxes, and supply stations were buried into the mountainside, reinforced with steel and concrete, and hidden so well even aerial reconnaissance couldn't detect them. The objective was simple: bleed the Americans until they broke. Kurabayashi, unlike other Japanese generals, knew the Americans would eventually win. But he was determined to make them pay so heavily for every inch that the US might think twice about invading Japan itself. His strategy was to delay, ambush, and sacrifice. There would be no last-ditch charges, no suicidal banzai screams, just silence, traps, and death from below. And so by the time American Marines landed in February 1945, they weren't walking onto an island. They were walking into a volcano designed to kill them slowly. On the morning of February 19th, the US unleashed one of the heaviest pre-invasion bombardments of the war. Naval guns pounded the island for days while bomber planes dropped tons of explosives, cratering the earth and painting the sky with fire. But what they didn't realize was that they were bombing ghosts. Most of the Japanese soldiers weren't in trenches or visible bunkers. They were deep underground, untouched and waiting. Then came the landing. Waves of Higgins boats dropped thousands of Marines onto the black shores. But this beach wasn't like the ones in Normandy. The sand was volcanic ash, fine, soft, and sticky. It swallowed boots, jammed tank treads, and slowed movement to a crawl. There were no trees to hide behind, no rocks for cover, just flat blackness and sky. At first, the silence was eerie. For over an hour, there was no gunfire. Some Marines thought the bombardment had worked. Others were more suspicious. And then, just as the beach was full, it started. From hidden pillboxes and camouflaged slopes, the Japanese opened fire with everything they had. Pre-sighted artillery exploded in the surf. Machine guns raked across the sand. Within minutes, chaos replaced confidence. Bodies fell faster than medics could respond. Vehicles burned. The first Marines who had landed were still trying to climb up the beach slope, and now they were being joined by fresh waves, all of them sitting ducks. What the Japanese had done was ingenious and brutal. They let the enemy come in fully, get comfortable, and then cut off their escape. They wanted to turn it into a killing field. And it worked. Even when Marines managed to push inland, they found themselves in a nightmarish landscape of craters, tunnels, and death that didn't follow the rules of warfare. There were no front lines. You could clear an enemy pillbox only to have them reappear from behind. That's when American commanders realized traditional weapons wouldn't win this fight. The deeper the Marines pushed into Iwo Jima, the stranger and deadlier the fight became. There were no safe zones, no clear enemy lines. The Japanese had built a fortress inside the island itself. And the most terrifying part of that fortress were the pillboxes. These weren't just concrete bunkers. They were masterpieces of death. Each one was reinforced to survive direct hits from tanks and naval guns. Their entrances were hidden behind rocks, angled to avoid being hit. Their gun ports were camouflaged and overlapping, meaning each pillbox could cover the next. A Marine couldn't just charge one. If he did, he'd get cut down by another he hadn't even seen. What made them worse was what lay beneath. Almost all of the pillboxes were connected by subterranean tunnels. You could destroy a bunker with grenades or explosives and move on, only for the Japanese to sneak back into it later and ambush you from behind. They were fighting ghosts behind them, beside them, even underneath them. Grenades, rifle fire, and satchel charges only worked if someone could get close enough. But getting close meant crawling over open ground under machine gun fire. And even if you reached the pillbox, the zigzag interior often absorbed the blast, sparing the defenders inside. It was a war of inches, and it was tearing the Marines apart. Then someone brought up an old, nearly forgotten weapon, the flamethrower. It wasn't new technology. Flamethrowers had existed in World War I. But on Iwo Jima, they became the only solution. Fire didn't care about zigzag walls or oxygen levels. It didn't bounce off reinforced doors. It flooded every space, robbed men of air, and made hiding impossible. The Marines began strapping fire to their backs and sending men into hell armed with nothing but a pistol and a flame. But what the flamethrower could do to the enemy was just the beginning. The real darkness would come when we saw what it did to the men who used it. The first American flamethrowers to hit the beaches at Iwo Jima were using the M2 flamethrower, a beast of a weapon that demanded both strength and madness to operate. Fully loaded, it weighed around 70 pounds with 2 heavy fuel tanks and a central nitrogen propellant tank strapped across the operator's back like a bomb waiting for a spark. The tanks were filled with a thickened mix of gasoline and diesel, a jelly that stuck to anything it touched and kept burning. The nozzle, held like a rifle, had a small white phosphorus igniter at the tip. When the operator pulled the trigger, it unleashed a roaring stream of flame up to 30 yards away for just 10 seconds total. 10 seconds. That was the difference between life and death. Every operator knew. You had one chance, one breath of fire, before your weapon ran dry and you became the most hunted man on the battlefield. Because make no mistake, if the Japanese saw you, they would try to kill you first. The flamethrower wasn't just another weapon. It was the most feared and hated weapon on Iwo Jima. From the moment it spat fire, every enemy rifle, grenade, and mortar zeroed in on its operator. Japanese soldiers called them demons, and their commanders issued direct orders to eliminate them at any cost. Flamethrower operators were often ambushed, shot on sight, or worse, captured. That more than anything terrified them. One Marine later recounted watching a fellow flamethrower trooper charge a cave, aim his weapon, and have it misfire. Before he could retreat, 2 Japanese soldiers grabbed him and pulled him into the darkness. For 2 days, Marines nearby heard his screams. Then they stopped. There was no rescue. That's why flamethrower men often begged their squad mates to shoot them if they ever got captured. They knew what would happen. And even if they survived, many never talked about what they had seen. The sound, the smell, the memory of what fire did to human beings in enclosed spaces.